how are you? Welcome on in.
Podcast by George.
Another podcast by George.
Podcast by George. Border to border. Coast to coast. Podcast by George.
Hello, hi, how are you? Welcome on in to another podcast by George. Well, it's another Sunday morning with Laura, folks. I can't get enough of these. I mean, Laura Belin, the great muckraking reporter. She's back at it again, and she's kind of in the news herself a little bit in a very small part. Very small way. We're going to talk about that here very shortly. And I don't know if you saw the little promo that I put together, but I kind of outdid myself today. I had these little puns going. The governor suffers a slapback. We're going to see what that's all about. And the GOP goes Blankrupt. Now, I can do a typo or two, but those weren't typos, folks. Those were on purpose. And we're going to be talking about that and a heck of a lot more. I want to take your comments and questions, too, for Laura, because I know a lot of people here are shocked and dismayed at what's happening at the Iowa State House here in the Capitol. Elections have consequences, and we're seeing the fruit being born. Rotten fruit it is for a lot of people. But let's do the introduction here. Let's get her live line graphic up on screen here, folks, and say that Bleeding Heartland and Laura Belin, that's a community blog providing original reporting and commentary about Iowa politics, especially campaigns and elections, state government, social, and environmental issues. That's right in my sweet spots, folks. Bleeding Heartland covers what the Iowans in Congress are up to and any federal, state, or local policies of interest to Iowa readers. Laura Belin has been the site's primary author and sole editor going back to 2008. I don't want to date her, but man, that's getting on. 2008, recognized nationwide as an authority on Iowa politics, the legislature, the judiciary, and, of course, the governor's office. And, man, that's all that we're going to be talking about today. And as I mentioned, Laura Belin is what I call a true muckraker. I love that word. She's rooting out details our elected officials would prefer remain out of view. I mean, I want you to look at this hand. Don't look at this one. And she's looking at this one, folks. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. They're trying to stonewall her efforts to get public record requests. And also, by the way, FYI, early in 2021, Laura began working part-time as the State House correspondent for KHOI Community Radio up in Ames, 89.1 FM. That's also on the web. You can hear her regular show there on the program Capitol Week, and I highly recommend that. Click a button, click one here, and let's see. There she is. Let's say good Sunday morning to Laura Belin. Hi, Laura.
Good morning, George.
Yeah, so you've been watching this hand. That's exactly. I mean, and thank God, yeah, and that you have the ability to do it. And that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today. It's this transparency thing. It's this effort to conceal the news and censor and so on. So let's get right to it here, because we always run out of time. And I know people are joining us. I want to get some questions and comments in here today also. But this is straight out of Bleeding Heartland. Now go to bleedingheartland.com and sign up there, folks, and you can follow along and you can subscribe. You can support them financially. You can go to her Patreon and support Laura's work there. Somebody needs to be doing this, because maybe I should have prefaced the whole thing, Laura. Everything that we're going to talk about today is absolutely worthless and moot if we can't find out about it, if it's concealed, if it's hidden out of view. And that's what this lead story is all about. Iowa Supreme Court rejects the governor's attempt to dismiss open record claims. Laura writes, the Iowa Supreme Court has allowed an open records lawsuit against the governor, Kim Reynolds, to proceed. So it's early yet, but it hasn't been rejected out of hand. It's being allowed to proceed. In a unanimous decision authored by Justice David May, the court said concerns about executive privilege or justice. What is that, Laura?
Justiciable.
Judiciable. Political. I read that a couple of times before we put it on, but I blew it there. Did not prevent plaintiffs from pursuing a claim that the governor's office violated the open records law known as Iowa Code Chapter 22 by failing to provide public records in a timely manner. Laura says, I'm among the plaintiffs who sued the governor, her office, and some of her staff in December 2021, citing failure to produce public records, in some cases for more than a year.
Mhm.
18 days after the ACLU of Iowa filed suit on our behalf, the governor's office provided most, but not all, records requests by me, the great Clark Kaufman of Iowa Capital Dispatch, and Randy Evans of the Iowa Freedom of Information Council. And Podcast by George viewers are used to seeing Randy Evans. I want to get Clark Kaufman on sometime. I haven't had him on. Okay, Laura, I want you to talk about this because I thought this was significant enough that I highlighted it. Reynolds appointed 5 of the 6 justices who joined the April 14th opinion. Justice Edward Mansfield, who was appointed by Governor Terry Branstad, recused himself from the case. So is this significant or not?
I think it is significant. And I want to emphasize, and you already said this, but I just want to make sure people understand that this is the early stage of this lawsuit. So the Iowa Supreme Court was not ruling on the merits of our claims, whether the governor's office violated the open records law. They were ruling on the governor's effort to have our lawsuit thrown out, and they unanimously rejected that. So yes, right, as you mentioned, Governor Reynolds has appointed 5 of the 7 justices. Governor Branstad appointed the other 2, and one of those recused himself from this case. So I think it is significant. A unanimous opinion is always a strong statement from the court, and we were very pleased. And I'm so grateful. I just want to give a lot of credit to the ACLU of Iowa, who represented us and put together a very strong case.
What does it mean for a justice to recuse himself? Now, for a dummy like me, I always kind of connect the dot, and maybe I shouldn't. There might be some conflict of interest there. Is that the case with this guy or not?
Well, usually, and this is a frustrating thing for all of us, is that when justices recuse, they typically don't explain the reason for their recusal, so you have to guess. And in this case, so we don't know for sure, but Michael Bohl, who is the governor's senior legal counsel and is a named defendant in the lawsuit, is a former clerk to Justice Mansfield, we believe. So we believe that that's why Justice Mansfield didn't participate in this case. We don't. We don't know.
All right, so let me go along. You mentioned the ACLU of Iowa. Here's the staff attorney, Thomas Story. This is what he says. Today's decision from the Iowa Supreme Court reaffirms the public's right to know. This is what's so important about this. This unanimous decision from the Iowa Supreme Court is a victory for democracy in the state of Iowa. An effective democracy is transparent and responsive to its people. It does not hide its work, and it does not ignore the press. So worst case scenario here, they're hiding it purposely. Best case scenario, and it's not a very good case scenario, they're simply ignoring the press because they can. It's a Republican state. They've got this trifecta going on. They've got all of the overwhelming support of the Iowa voters, and they've just decided that the Iowa press can go fish. I mean, that might be the best way to look at it on their perspective, but that sucks in my view. We are pleased with this decision and its impact on the rights of all Iowans to access information. So, and I don't want to get into higher level things, but all the way from Julian Assange down, including this thing that's in the news right now with this kid releasing this information out there, transparency is always a good thing. You don't want nuclear codes out floating around, obviously. You have to have some secrets. You could get rid of the nuclear weapons, obviously, but we're all better served if we know what in the hell's going on, because that preamble or whatever says we the people. It's us, folks. We're the ones that deserve and need this transparency, except for, like I said, nuclear codes.
And I want to emphasize that the Iowa Open Records Law, Chapter 22, it is for everybody. And journalists do file a lot of public records requests, but anybody can file a records request with the governor's office or with any local or state government body. And that it's important that the Iowa Supreme Court has said that you can't just sidestep the law by ignoring the request for months and months, or in some cases over a year, that an extended delay can be tantamount to a refusal to provide records.
God. So here's Laura's statement, and there's only so much she can say about this. I understand because she's a part of this. So talking about Laura Belin's perspective in Bleeding Heartland, the governor's office sets the tone for the rest of state government. This is really important. I highlighted this because this is what I think. They're beginning the process. This is kind of what it looks like to me. They would like to get by this and go on, and it ain't going to get better. It's going to get worse, and it has to do with this tone that you mentioned, Laura.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Yes.
yeah.
And I just this week, I finally got a reply from a state agency about a request. They didn't send me the records. They just responded to my request that I submitted on January 5th. So that's more than 3 months that I had to wait just for them to even acknowledge the request and tell me how much it would cost to compile the records for me.
Yeah, it's a snowball coming down the hill, and it's going to hit us all, folks. When the governor's staff ignores record requests for months and on end, and sometimes for more than a year, as Laura mentions, it's sending a message that complying with the open records law is, it's optional. Unfortunately, even though Governor Reynolds ended the public health emergency more than a year ago, some state entities still delay for months before responding to public records requests. Okay, I want to move on here. And I want to get Laura saying maybe more than she wants to here. So, the statement from Randy Evans. I mentioned Randy's been on my show a lot. God, he's great. He's the executive director of the Iowa Freedom of Information Council. He says it's worth noting the Supreme Court's decision today included a reminder to government officials that public records must be provided, even when it might be inconvenient or embarrassing to do so. And the court made clear that a refusal to provide records might take the form of a plain no, or it simply could be no response at all. And I got to tell you now, here's what I thought when I read that. This thing where people don't respond at all, this has gotten to be quite a thing. This is how a lot of America says no anymore, Laura. And I'll tell you, when I first saw this come into vogue, was with cell phones.
Mhm.
You would send a text to someone asking a question. And if they didn't reply, they didn't reply to say no. They just didn't reply at all. I don't know if that's how this got to be a thing, but this is what Randy's talking about. Simply not replying or responding is the same thing as saying no.
And I want to just say, where would we be without the Iowa Freedom of Information Council? I really
Yeah.
encourage people to support them. Their website is ifoic.org. And if you are thinking about asking for information and you're not sure how to do that, they have sample letters on their website of how you would write to a government official requesting public records. And it's very helpful to people who don't have a lot of experience with it.
Yeah, and if you ever encounter Randy Evans, he's absolutely great. I mean, this guy is the voice of authority. He's got newsprint ink under his fingernails, folks. I mean, he's a veteran reporter, formerly with the Des Moines Register, a great guy. I mean, you got any questions, you need any help, Randy Evans is the guy to talk to. Now, this is from Kathy Obranovich of the Iowa Capital Dispatch, the independent, not-for-profit statewide news organization. She says, on behalf of Iowa Capital Dispatch, we're grateful the Iowa Supreme Court recognized that for Iowa's open records law to be meaningful, it has to be enforceable, and that government officials can't dodge the law simply by ignoring requests for records. It shouldn't take a lawsuit to gain access to public documents. It's important for the media and therefore the people of Iowa to receive this important information in a timely manner, not a year later, especially during a public health crisis. And I don't know if you want to comment on that or not, Laura, but I know a lot of this, a lot of the excuse making from the governor's office was because of the pandemic. But I'm thinking, you guys were shut in. You weren't traveling around as much. You weren't doing as many public appearances and stuff. You could have dealt with these public records requests, and particularly in a pandemic when people are kind of sitting at home in the dark, cold, and fearful, for God's sake. What a good thing for the governor to do. Instead, she disappears, doesn't do news conferences, doesn't comply with the open records requests. And I mean, I can go on and on. What do you think about that?
I mean, this will be something that the district court will consider when it goes back there. But yes, that was a key point of our lawsuit, was that the oldest of my requests, we had 8 requests that were part of the original lawsuit, and 5 of them were from me. And my oldest request was from April of 2020. And then I had 2 from July of 2020. So we filed suit in December of 2021, and records were provided, some records, in early January of 2022. So, I mean, more than a year, that's a lot of time passing. And the governor was out there periodically encouraging Iowans to resume their normal lives.
And I also want to emphasize, I mentioned it there briefly, it's not just that the governor isn't responding to these direct, specific requests. And what happened to the news conferences? Lauren and I have talked about this before. The governor's not even volunteering or pushing information out to the people. They used to do that every Monday morning, but it's all part of this cloak and dagger thing that's going on. And I think we're going to see more of it and not less. Well, I got some other stories I wanted
Yeah,
to get to here, including another transparency issue with the GOP here in Iowa. And again, I want to encourage everybody, if you have comments or questions for Laura, just text those in the comments box, and I'll get to those throughout the show. But anything you want to mention here or discuss before I move off of this topic, Laura?
no, this is fine. We've got a lot to talk about.
Yeah, that's for sure. And this one's kind of related, kind of isn't, but it's kind of part of the same thing that we're talking about. I mean, these things are kind of funny, but they're not funny, ha. They're kind of funny, weird, and kind of funny, dangerous here. The Iowa Senate Republicans hit a new low for transparency. Again, this is an article in Bleeding Heartland. Go to bleedingheartland.com. Iowa Republican lawmakers aren't sticklers for tradition. They'd like for you to believe. Again, this is supposed to be the hallmark of the GOP, big tradition. They want to return to the 1920s, I think. Well, they've used their trifecta, and Laura and I talked about this on the last show she was on, I think. This Republican Party that controls the judiciary, the legislature, the governor's office here in the state of Iowa, to destroy a collective bargaining process that stood for more than 4 decades and to overhaul a nearly 60-year-old judicial selection system on a partisan basis. So, do you want to just briefly go over those again, Laura?
So in 2017 is when they just shredded the public employee collective bargaining law. So public sector employees have far fewer rights than they had. And this was a law, actually, the original 1973 law was enacted under a Republican trifecta. Governor Bob Ray, Republicans controlled the legislature at the time. But when they drafted that bill, they brought in lots of stakeholders. They brought in labor unions and many different people. And they came up with a process that was fairly balanced and worked really well for 40 years. Then the legislature just came in and made it completely one-sided, favoring the employers over the workers. And then the judicial changes that happened in 2019. And the final bill was not as extreme as what the Republicans initially wanted to do. They had to water it down a little bit. But yes, this was something that was a constitutional amendment Iowans had approved by a large majority in 1962. It had never been tinkered with under previous Republican trifectas, Democratic trifectas, and it wasn't something the governor campaigned on in 2018. And all of a sudden, they're trying to change it to give the governor more power to appoint judges in the Iowa Court of Appeals and Iowa Supreme Court.
Yeah, and that union busting thing, that can't be overemphasized. I'm reminded, I have people that go back to the day, they might remember Archie Bunker, All in the Family, and I think it was Maude, whenever she wanted to get under Archie's skin, she would just say Roosevelt to him. Well, I got to know because I had to, I was employed by Republicans, staunch Republicans in business. I got to know those folks pretty well. You wanted to get under the skin of those business owners, say union.
Mhm.
Talk unions. I mean, you think, well, there's a lot of things that the GOP leaders are really nah, man, it's all about the unions. They hate the unions. Honest to God, I was kind of surprised or taken aback by that, but that was my personal experience anyway.
Well, and it's contributing to the teacher shortage we have now, because if you're a new teacher, unless you had a strong family reason for being in Iowa, I mean, why would you want to come to Iowa where you have no bargaining rights to speak of and pay is lower? You can go to Minnesota or Illinois and have a better contract.
And not be respected, not be rewarded, not be paid, be shortchanged at every possible avenue. And the other thing of it is not be protected in the classroom. These damn guns are everywhere. And look what's going on. I don't know how we're going to get teachers. I don't know how we're going to get hospital workers. In the future, I'm really concerned about it. I mean, staffing shortages and these,
Yeah. It's a big problem.
Big problem. All right, let's continue, because this is the part where this gets weird and it almost gets laugh out loud funny. Iowa Senate Republicans have shattered norms in other ways. In 2021, they stopped participating in budget subcommittee meetings that had been a routine part of legislative work since at least the 1970s. I think the Iowa legislature budget is what I think about first and foremost, about what these folks are supposed to be doing. I'm like, what? Last year, they kicked all journalists off the chamber's press bench, which had been designed for the news media for more than a century. And I think, okay, so this is what we're talking about, right, Laura? That's the
area where, yes, for a century. I mean, it's literally was called the press bench, and it was something that for more than 100 years, we went back to around at least 1900, looking at the Senate journals. The first day of the session, the leadership would assign seats to members of the media on the press bench.
So let me bring this up a little bit bigger here if people are watching it so they can get an idea of this. So here's down towards the bottom of the screen here. There, those are your legislators. And what a great just visual this is, if nothing else. It's kind of like, hey, we're looking at you. I
Mhm.
mean, we're watching what you're doing out there. So number one, don't be sleeping at your desk, but there's accountability there. I mean,
Well,
I like that.
and
Yeah.
I mean, I was never allowed to sit in the press area anyway. But if you talk to reporters who are used to working there, I mean, it makes a big difference. If you're working on a story, you have a quick question about a bill that was just debated, or you want to clarify something, you can motion and the senator will come over and talk to you and answer your question. So now the journalists are way up. There's an area of the public gallery, but it's obstructed view. You can't get good photos, audio, video. You certainly can't ask any clarifying questions. So it's a much different experience covering the Iowa Senate.
Well, and then ask yourself, is it by accident or is it by design? Like we talked about earlier, they're literally pushing off these journalists, these reporters, and it has to do with this inclusiveness type thing. I mean, you look at that and you think, well, they're part of it. They're
Mhm.
part of this process. The sausage making includes this oversight by reporters, but not anymore. Like Laura says, they've been put in the nosebleed gallery, and these people, I don't even know if they're aware that they're up there, who they are, how many there are, and that type of thing. They were back then, but they're not any longer. Okay, let's.
And this budget process, I mean, I know it seems like it's a little in the weeds, but and when I said that goes back to at least the 1970s, that was just what I could confirm from talking to people who either covered the Iowa legislature or served in the Iowa legislature during the 70s. It's possible it goes back further than that, and I just wasn't able to find people who were working in the legislature who are still alive or earlier than that. But this is a very long tradition, regardless of which party controlled the legislature. These joint budget subcommittees that had public meetings over a period of a couple of months where they would invite in state agency leaders and key officials. They would set targets for spending for each of the agencies. And it all happened in public view. And people could submit comments if they said, hey, that's too big an increase for this budget, or that's too big a cut for whatever it is, in anything from the Department of Cultural Affairs to corrections to education, you name it, Medicaid. They were talking about it in public meetings. And that's what the Senate started to move away from a couple of years ago. And then this year, it sort of hit the farcical level. So I'll let you go on.
Yeah, continue to read that. I mean, back in the 70s, I was covering the news. I could have been in there. I mean, and I would be able to tell you, but I purposely kind of stayed away from That's why I respect that what Laura does so much. I mean, this is sausage making, literally. It's a long process. It's difficult. There's a lot of X's and O's. There's a lot of financial information involved. This is hard work. This is what muckraking is all about. I don't know if I was lazy or just young and wanted more excitement, but it just wasn't for me. And I kind of regret that a little bit, but yeah, I wasn't sitting there back in the 70s. Senate Appropriations Committee members hit a new low for transparency last week, led by Chair Tim Krayenbrink. Am I saying that right, Laura?
I think
Krayenbrink?
so. Right,
Yeah,
Frank, I think.
Krayenbrink. Okay, Republicans advanced 7 spending bills with blank spaces. See this high spending bills with blank spaces where dollar amounts and staffing numbers would normally be listed. What? This unprecedented maneuver ensured that advocates, journalists, and Democratic senators will have no time to thoroughly scrutinize GOP spending plans before eventual votes on the Senate floor. Nor will members of the public have a chance to weigh in on how state funds will be spent during fiscal year 2024, which begins on July 1st. Yeah, offhand, this just seems like silliness, but this is really important. I mean, my God, this is a big deal, Laura.
It really is. And it's funny because I check every day. I look to see what committee meetings are happening and when. And so I saw that the Senate Appropriations Committee was going to start to move budget bills. So I thought, okay, I joined the meeting by Zoom, but I didn't click on the budget bills ahead of time to see that. So I didn't actually know they were blank. I mean, they were published on the website, but I hadn't clicked on them. So I was expecting a discussion over how much they were proposing to spend on this or that agency. And then, I mean, it was kind of a surreal meeting because the chair, Tim Krayenbrink, kept like they would move from one bill to another, and then he would say, well, are there any are there any comments? Does any member of the public have a comment? And of course, nobody had any comments because there are no numbers in the bill. So when I realized that they were moving these blank budget bills, and the Democrats on the committee were really frustrated about it because they said we shouldn't be advancing bills out of our committee where people have no idea how much is going to be spent.
Well, it defeats the purpose, the fundamental of it. I mean, the process in its entirety. Again, these are Republicans that are, steep themselves in tradition and the way things have been done in the past. And so they just pull this rabbit out of a hat. And this kind of, went under the radar. Not a lot of people were aware of this, but I mean,
I know Iowa Capitol Dispatch did cover that meeting, and I'm trying to remember if I saw something else somewhere, but I talked, this was a couple of years ago when they stopped participating in those budget subcommittees. I remember talking to Tom Witowski, great reporter for many years,
yes.
Register. So he was a political reporter for many years. Then he moved over to sports, really great investigative reporter. But he covered the legislature during the 70s and 80s. And he was talking about how Republicans really prided themselves on their deep knowledge of the state budget and working on the state budget. And this was just something that is hard to imagine. It's just hard to fathom them doing. And so a lot of people have asked me since I published that story, so what does that mean? What's the next step? Well, what's going to happen is the closed door negotiations are going on between the House and the Senate Republicans. And when they agree on numbers for everything, they're going to bring these blank bills to the Senate floor, and then they're going to run amendments, what they call strike after amendments, that replace the whole bill, that put in all the numbers, and they're just going to ram those through probably over a 1 or a 2 day period. Well, it's too much. I mean, the state budget is more than $8 billion in spending. Just the Health and Human Services budget alone is like $2 billion, with Medicaid and many other programs. And so there's not going to be time for everybody to look closely and see what's lurking in those budgets and what's in the last minute deal. And there are always some last minute amendments to the budget, right? I mean, it's not unusual for a committee to vote out a bill and say, we have the understanding that this is going to be changed in some way before we debate it on the floor. But something like this with just nothing, where nobody has any idea what to go on, it's just ridiculous. And the Republicans on the committee were sitting there acting like this was just a normal day at work. It was bizarre to watch.
And they're wanting to do things behind the curtain, folks. They're wanting to do things in the smoky room. They're wanting to have strong men run the country. And think about Donald Trump. I mean, I'm talking about the GOP here. I'm talking about read Sheldon Wolin, the rest in peace, the great political theorist. I mean, he talks about inverted totalitarianism. And what that is basically is we used to think of fascism or totalitarianism as the government gaining control of the corporations. That's the way it always has been in the past. Well, the inverted part of this is it's upside down right now. The corporations have control of us. And I think that's responsible for the way business is being done or not being done. But check out Sheldon Wolin. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a strange. And okay, so think about me on Podcast by George. Now I cover stuff. I've had a member of the European Parliament on not that long ago. I got a guy in Ukraine that is riding the war out over there that I put on. And so Laura's covering the Iowa legislature, and I'm like, God, this is a process. It's sausage making. I wonder if I should get to Laura. And I read stories like this. I'm like, what in the hell? I mean, I can't put it off any longer. I got to get this, on the air. This is, for me, these two stories, because of the transparency, the First Amendment issues involved here. These are some of the biggest things in the Iowa legislature I've seen in my lifetime. That's me personally.
Yeah, it really is uncharted territory for the Iowa legislature. I mean, the budget is the main thing that they have to do before they get out of town. They have to pass a budget for the year that begins on July 1st. And for almost all of that to happen behind closed doors. And again, there have always been late changes to budget bills. And at the last minute, some amendment is run that adds a few $1 million here or takes some money away from that. But this is very different. I mean, this is basically the entire state government funded in a black hole at this point. And we're going to find out it'll be very difficult to cover everything that happens whenever they strike a deal to end the session. Because remember, there will be other legislation that's part of that grand bargain. So they're probably going to be ramming through a lot of bills at the very end. There's usually some 1 or 2 or 3 important policy bills that get passed at the end, in addition to all of the budget bills.
Well, I don't want to wear it out with all of these analogies, and some may not be that accurate. But as a reporter, for instance, just me, when I'm thinking about covering something or interviewing someone, if I have time to sit down and think about it and review and put my questions together, as opposed to trying to do it on the fly, which is what we're talking about here with these budget numbers, well, the questions are a lot better. The end result is a lot better. And so these last minute things that you're talking about, they're not going to happen if that's the first time you're learning of it or seeing it or shortly thereafter. You've got to have some time. And it's big money we're talking about here, folks. Big effect and impacts on people's lives. And these people, these legislators, hell, they all get out of town. I mean, they don't work through the summer, right? I mean, this isn't a timing thing, is it?
No, they're supposed to finish by the end of April. Usually it drags on a little into May. But another issue is that the minority party, the Democrats in this case, I mean, they can't control the budget, right? They're not going to win the vote of the day, but they should be able to look at the budget bill and identify the things they most strongly disagree with and offer amendments. Well, it's going to be difficult for them to even drop amendments to be debated on the Iowa Senate
Yes.
floor because all of this is going to come crashing down at the last minute. And so that was why people so strongly objected. And Bill Dotzler, who's a Democratic senator from Waterloo, who's been in the legislature for 27 years, I mean, he was really getting worked up during these meetings about how this whole process, this budget process, it's supposed to be a learning experience for the legislators, and it's also supposed to help the public understand how the government is working, and it's just not functioning. And he said even in the majority party there are a lot of new senators, there are a lot of Republican senators who were never in the legislature when the way this process used to work, and they just don't know a lot about how the government operates. I mean, it's really complicated. I'm definitely not an expert on the state budget. It's very complicated, and there are lots of nooks and crannies there. But so it's difficult even for the people who do follow it closely when you have something like this happen.
Well, and before I go any further, again, go to bleedingheartland.com. That's where this story, you can read it more in depth and follow it. And we're going to talk about some other stories that Laura is following. And this next one's a big one. Anything more on this one, Laura? Or should we move
No,
on?
this is good. We can move on to the
All right,
next.
let's take a look because this is a big story here, and this is something that I know that you're working on. You mentioned the Iowa Capitol Dispatch earlier. The Iowa Supreme Courts are hearing latest arguments over the 2018 fetal heartbeat bill. All right, the Iowa Supreme Court heard oral arguments Tuesday as to whether the court should continue to prevent the state from enforcing the so-called fetal heartbeat abortion ban. 5 years ago, Iowa lawmakers approved a bill that seeks to ban most abortions after cardiac impulses can be detected in an embryo, which typically occurs about 6 weeks after conception. The law contains exemptions for rape, incest, and to save the life of the mother. In 2019, a district court judge issued an injunction preventing the state from enforcing the new law. But this is something Kim Reynolds is all over. This is something that is far from settled law here. Tell us about this one, Laura.
This is a really complicated case, and that's one reason why my story on it, even though the oral arguments happened on Tuesday, there were some intervening events this week, and I still haven't had a chance to finish my story. So as you mentioned, first of all, I want to say that fetal heartbeat law is a bit of a misnomer, right? It's not a fetus yet at 6 weeks, and it's not technically, it doesn't have a developed heart organ. The electrical impulses that the Doppler scanner can pick up is not really truly a heartbeat. But in any case, and it's 6 weeks after the last menstrual period. It's not 6 weeks after conception. So we're talking 4 weeks after. I mean, it's very rare actually for people to even find out that they're pregnant in time, but by 6 weeks from the date of the last menstrual period. So it's estimated if this law went into effect, it would ban about 98% of all abortions because most people don't find out they're pregnant. If they do find out they're pregnant, it's not like you can just immediately get a doctor's appointment the next day, right? It takes a while to get an appointment on the schedule. And then Iowa has a 24-hour waiting period for abortion. So very unlikely that if you wanted to terminate a pregnancy, very unlikely you would be able to accomplish that before a Doppler scanner could pick up these electrical impulses that they're calling a heartbeat.
And I didn't create a graphic of the map, but I was struck by the fact places, states where they're almost a total abortion ban right now. If you look at that map, these red, it's all of these states that Kim Reynolds has an affinity for whatever reason, which I've always thought is peculiar. I mean, starting at Missouri and running down into these southern Bible thumping states and that type of thing. She's wanting to bring Iowa in line with these Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas, states like that. We will be very similar if she has her way. And this is not a small issue with her. This is a big one, correct?
Right. And it doesn't just affect Iowans because, as you say, Iowa is a state right now, people can access abortion up to 20 weeks. And so it's a state that people can travel to from other places, Missouri or other states where the procedure is almost completely banned. But yes, Florida just passed, Governor DeSantis just signed a very strict abortion ban down there. So yes, all of the states that Governor Reynolds is emulating. But one interesting thing about this case is that, I mean, she's got large Republican majorities in the legislature, right? She could have gone back and asked the legislature to pass a new law that looks very much like the 2018 law, but she's trying to get the courts to do the heavy lifting for her. And so one of the things about this case is that the Iowa Supreme Court is possibly not going to decide like on the merits of certain things about, when exactly could Iowa regulate abortion. I mean, they could reach those issues, but it's very possible that this could just be thrown out on procedural grounds. Like she's trying to appeal a final judgment that happened more than 3 years earlier. The Iowa rules of civil procedure don't allow that to happen. You have to file your appeal within 12 months. There are some other procedural issues related to it. So it's possible that the court could kind of punt on this one and say, this is just not a case that we can determine right now. Or it's possible that they could send it back to lower court to be argued, to have certain issues arguing. But what the state is going for here is really big. Like they're looking for at least 4 Iowa Supreme Court justices to say, yes, we can revisit a very old closed case. Yes, we can lift an injunction that was a permanent injunction a long time ago. And oh, by the way, yes, the 6-week ban on abortion would be constitutional. And so Planned Parenthood and the other plaintiffs are making a lot of different arguments, and there are just a lot of different ways the court could look at it.
Well, when I look at the makeup of the Iowa Supreme Court, I was somewhat stricken with dread, basically, after the last appointments and elections and that type of thing. But then this ruling that we talked about earlier with the open records request, maybe the composition of the court isn't as big an issue or as bad as I thought. Or do you have any feeling on that?
Well, to lay out where, first of all, I want to mention that. So one of the 7 justices, Dana Oxley, is not participating in this case over the 2018 law. And again, they don't announce the reasons, but we think that's because the Cedar Rapids law firm she used to work for represents the Emma Goldman Clinic in Iowa City, which is also a party to this. So that's probably why she's recusing. So that leaves 6. And 5 of them were on the court last year when the Iowa Supreme Court overturned its own abortion rights precedent. This happened a week before the U.S. Supreme Court issued that Dobbs decision that overturned Roe v. Wade. But so 5 of the justices were on the court participating in that. 4 of them agreed with overturning the court's 2018 precedent. The Chief Justice, Susan Christensen, she did not agree with that. She would have struck down that 24-hour waiting period as unconstitutional, upholding that 2018 precedent. And then within the justices who participated, they didn't all agree on what the standard should be. Okay, so 2 of the justices said, we think that the rational basis, that's the lowest bar for the state to clear, that should be the way the court looks at abortion regulations. That's what the U.S. Supreme Court did in Dobbs, and that basically allows almost anything up to a total ban. Then the other 2, Justices Waterman and Mansfield, and Justice Oxley, who again is recusing from this case, they said, we're not going to establish a new legal standard for now. For now, we're going to leave this undue burden standard, which is more of a balancing test, like balancing the state's interest in reducing abortions with the pregnant person's interests and having some bodily autonomy and control over your own life. So that's one of the things that's really unclear is what is the standard right now in Iowa for evaluating abortion regulations? And the way that decision left it last year, they left this undue burden standard in place. Now, the state is now saying the undue burden standard, it doesn't make any sense. The U.S. Supreme Court overturned it in Dobbs. Like Iowa shouldn't be doing that. But But for now, that's the standard in Iowa. So, and you, like I said, there are so many complicated procedural issues with this case that you really don't know how the justices are going to look at it, because it could be that some future law, maybe they would uphold some future abortion ban, but they might look at this one and say, this isn't the right case. This isn't properly before our court, right? This isn't how we do things in the Iowa rules of civil procedure. So it's just a very hard case to write about. Like a lot of lawsuits, there's a binary outcome. One side wins or the other side wins. And this one, and there are a lot of, I mean, the legal issues, the cases that they're referencing are from, 1909, 1934, 1935. I mean, these are some really old legal issues, like about what happens when a law is declared unconstitutional, and is there any way to bring it back once it's declared unconstitutional? So really a big thicket here, but a very important case.
Well, yeah, it's huge here in the state of Iowa. What about the rest of the country? Does this have far-reaching implications, or activists and advocates watching this elsewhere in the country, or is this mostly an Iowa issue at this point?
Well, there was a friend of the court brief that was filed by medical providers in other states that said that this is not just going to affect Iowa, because Iowa right now, as I mentioned, this is a place that some people travel to for an abortion. And also, if Iowa effectively bans 98% of all abortions, it's going to increase burdens in states like Minnesota and Illinois, where abortion remains legal. It's going to increase the burdens on the providers in those states. And also, I mean, it will be very difficult. I mean, many people can't just take 2 or 3 days off work and go drive 400 miles to the nearest abortion clinic. It's going to be very difficult. And they said that what may end up happening is more people try to self-manage their own abortions at home rather than doing it under the supervision of a medical provider. That could be a dangerous thing. So yes, I would say abortion rights, reproductive rights advocates from all over the country are watching this. They're watching what's going on in every state. And this is certainly a case that's gotten attention. I mean, the lawyer who argued for Planned Parenthood was one of their national lawyers for Planned Parenthood Federation of America. So definitely a very important case.
All right. Again, I've got a segue, a story that's kind of related here that's interesting. Anything further before we move off?
Nope. This is
all right, good. This is another jaw dropper, folks. I got this out of Bleeding Heartland. I looked at this one like, again, a governor entered private Iowa Supreme Court area without permission. What? Because that's what I say. I read these stories, and that's what I do in my mind's eye all the time. What? Governor Kim Reynolds, her staff and security detail used a non-public elevator and walked down the secure hallway where Iowa Supreme Court justices have private offices before attending the April 11th oral arguments in a major abortion-related case. Quote, neither the justices, Supreme Court staff, or judicial branch building security knew or gave permission for the governor or Iowa State Highway Patrol to access the Supreme Court's non-public office space, end quote, at the time, according to Molly Kottmeyer, counsel to Chief Justice Susan Christensen.
This was
yeah,
this was just wild. And I have to say that, so the oral arguments were on Tuesday, and I expected to spend most of Wednesday working on my post about the oral arguments, but I ended up spending much of Wednesday chasing this story and I have to set the scene a little bit. So I went down, they had a room, a very small room set aside for media at the Iowa Judicial Branch building, and the arguments were going to start at 9 on Tuesday, and I got there at around 8:45 after dropping my son off from school. So I got to this room. I wasn't the first journalist there, and I heard somebody say, the governor's here. And I was like, really? Because that is, first of all, that's just not normal. I'm trying to find out whether there's precedent for that. I mean, there are a lot of cases, lawsuits against the state that involve the governor. I'm not aware of this governor or the several governors before her. I'm not aware of the governor showing up and sitting right there in the front row to watch the Iowa Supreme Court oral arguments. That's highly unusual in itself. And so I asked the other reporters, did anybody see her come in? Because I assumed that she must have just arrived at the building before I got there. Well, nobody saw her come in. So then we found out why the next day, because, I mean, my speculation is that one of the reasons for using this non-public entrance and elevator was to sidestep the press so nobody could ask her a question in the hallway. But it's just wild. And I had some trolls on Twitter say, that's all you got? She walked down the hallway. But talk to any attorneys, man, because this is highly improper to be in the private space of a courthouse. There's a lot of confidential information back there, and it's a terrible appearance to have a party to a lawsuit. They're kind of mingling. I'm not saying that
Yeah.
she was conversing with the judges, but it's just not done. And I think the reason why the Chief Justice put this letter out there is because it's almost, it seems like what they call in legal terms an ex parte communication, which is where the judge communicates with one of the parties outside the courtroom and not in the presence of the lawyers. And that is really not supposed to happen. So when there is any ex parte communication, the judges are supposed to make sure that all of the attorneys know what happened. And I think that's why this letter was put out there, because I started asking some questions about it on Wednesday. And then all of a sudden, the judicial branch press guy sends me a copy of this letter that went out to the attorneys. And the funny thing was, it wasn't just that abortion case, of course, where Reynolds is a key litigant, but there was another case they were hearing that morning that involved the Iowa State Patrol. If you remember Larry Headland, a former Department of Criminal Investigation guy, he's the one who caught Governor Branstad's SUV doing a hard
Speaking, yeah.
race. And he ended up being demoted and soon fired. So he filed a whistleblower lawsuit. I mean, this case has been bouncing around for 10 years now. But his case was being heard, and the Iowa State Patrol is one of the defendants to that. So the governor's security detail are made up of Iowa State Patrol people. So that also had the appearance of impropriety to have Iowa State Patrol officers back there in that private space. And it's just not normal. Talking with lawyers who have argued before the court, people who have clerked for the Supreme Court justices in the past. I mean, it's just not something that ever happens, that litigants just go walking through those back areas, and they didn't ask for permission. They didn't let them know they were going to be coming. According to that letter from the Chief Justice's counsel, the state troopers just used their badges to access the building.
And it has to do with the separation of powers. That's I look at it too. I mean, they're not supposed to be commingling like this. And you could make an argument that that's kind of like your boss sitting down in a meeting where they don't normally attend. When the boss comes in and sits down at your meeting, and you've had lots of, I mean, you kind of snap to and pay attention, particularly when they have an extremely vested interest, like Kim Reynolds does. I looked at that and thought, my God. And it goes to this. Thing that I talk about on the show all the time, as Laura knows, the momos. I mean, is this by accident or is this by design? The movie Casino, I look at it and I say, my take on this always is that they're doing this purposely. This wasn't just a screw up. I think that, and why choose this one? I guess you could look at it that way. Oh, this particular issue, this suit. Yeah.
I mean, some people did see it as an attempt to intimidate. I mean, I don't know. That was one of the questions I had for the governor's office. I mean, did the governor consider that might create the appearance that she was trying to influence the justices? And of course, they didn't answer my questions, but they did send a statement to Clark Kaufman of the Iowa Capitol Dispatch, and they said that this was based on a legitimate security issue. But I mean, again, I had follow-up questions that haven't been answered yet. But what's the security concern exactly? Because if you've ever entered the Iowa Judicial Branch building, you got to walk through a metal detector. You have to put any bags or cases through an X-ray scanner machine. So I don't, and when the governor, I've been told that when the governor has gone to that building before to attend a swearing in or investiture of a new justice, she hasn't gone through that back entrance for that. There weren't crowds of people outside, by the way. There were a small number of people, I would estimate fewer than 24 people gathered in prayer outside the building, people who were hoping that this abortion ban will go into effect. There weren't any pro-choice protesters or activists there gathered around the court. So I don't really see what the security concern would have been. And I don't know whether the goal was just to avoid the interacting with the press or to send a message to the justices that she can walk through there. I have no idea, but it from universally, the attorneys I've talked to about this say this is inappropriate.
Yeah, and I would say to the governor, if you're concerned about security, all of us are. We're all fearful. I mean, if I go to a concert, a show, a movie theater, my wife in particular, we're all afraid. Why are we afraid? Because you ain't doing your part of this, Kim Reynolds, when it comes to security, the guns issue, and that type of thing. So do something to make yourself and the rest of us safe. I can bring this up on screen here, Laura. You can talk to this a little bit. This is a video that I know you've seen before. A lot of people haven't. This is, let me back this up here and begin at the very beginning. So I thought this was kind of cool because most people have never walked in. So this is the chamber we're talking about, right?
So that would be the entrance that most people would walk in, as they would. I mean, every time I've been in the room, anytime members of the public, lawyers, parties appearing before the court, they walk through that entrance to the back. But the governor came in from the side. She came in through where the Supreme Court justices' private offices are, and she came in through the side and then sat in the front row of seats there. So, when we were all down there saying, "Oh, really? How, when did she get here?" That's why nobody saw her arrive at the building, because she came in through this back way.
I'm struck when I look at this video, and again, I'm an old lefty, so you got to kind of put it in context to where I'm coming from. But these things that's very impressive. I mean, it's a very solemn-looking, formal place, and it's very ornate and that type of thing. But again, don't get the wrong idea. Don't be intimidated about this is for us. The people are still the people to be served here. These people and they work for us, kind of. Now, you don't crawl through the windows like the idiots on January 6th, but I mean, also don't give them a free pass. I mean, that's how the oligarchy, as it's talked about all the time, operates. I mean, they punch down on the rest of us because we're afraid to stand our ground and take our proper place in this. And it's supposed to be about us. So yeah, it's a nice place. And yeah.
Yes, I mean, there are seats in the courtroom for members of the
Yes.
public can go in. I mean, you can arrive and as you go through the metal detector and everything, but you can arrive and watch the Iowa Supreme Court oral argument. There were just on Tuesday, there was a group of, I think, middle school students there during that other case that they were arguing over that had to do with the former DCI guy who the Chief Justice asked all of the justices to announce where they went to middle school for the benefit of the middle school students. So yes, I mean, there is supposed to be public access to the building. And I was down there for the oral arguments in our open records case. And it would have never occurred to me that anybody attending Iowa Supreme Court arguments would try to come in through the justice's private office space. It's just wild. And I do think it raises the separation of powers question, as you say, but just generally the sense of entitlement that the governor had, and she didn't give them a heads up that she was coming. She didn't ask if it was okay for her to do that. She and her entourage just walked on through.
So for this video that's up on screen for people that are watching now, they're coming in from behind here, the back right or back left, or
I don't know if it's the back right or the back left, because honestly, I've never seen that part of the building. But yeah,
okay.
I mean, she didn't come in through that entrance where the camera's coming in, where people would come in. There's a separate elevator that the justices and I think some of the staff can use, and that's the one that her security detail was able to access with their badges. And that's the one she came in. So they saw, and it's not clear whether they had any conversations. I think the governor's office is contending that they didn't have any conversations, but certainly the justices did see that the governor was in their hallway.
Okay, great. Well, I mean, this has been a great show. I mean, for me, this is kind of like an extended version of a component that I have in my show all the time, which is what in the hell? I mean, this is kind of like what we're talking. I mean, that's kind of what I felt like when there's my little typewriter with the graphic in it as I'm reading Bleeding Heartland. Anything else here that I haven't hit on? Because I just kind of picked the most outrageous stuff, Laura. Maybe it's not even the most important sometimes. But
Well, I mean, there's all kinds of outrages that I haven't written about yet. But just this week, I mean, the Iowa House approved, and the Iowa Senate had already passed it in March, this bill that's going to kick thousands of people off their federal food assistance, and it's going to probably kick thousands of people off Medicaid. And it's not even going to save us any money, because food assistance, what they call the SNAP program that many people still call food stamps, that's federally funded 100%. So we're actually going to be spending more money to hire state employees to try to scrutinize and kick people off food assistance. I mean, that's just a complete outrage. And I just haven't had time. The Iowa House debate was about 3.5 hours long. So I'm still working my way through that. But you just think, I mean, what if they use their power to do things that didn't ruin people's lives?
Here's a friend of the show, Susan June Robbins, known to Podcast by George. She says, Governor Reynolds is behaving like a megalomaniac. Yeah, and again, not not by accident, but by design. I got to tell you, I mean, I can say because it's my show and I'm extremely biased. Don't get, I'm way out here on the left, but I think the right wing of America, which comprises most of it right now, really believes that the way out of this, everybody's unhappy about something, but the GOP in particular believes that the way out of this is to shove the journalists to the back, give us strong men and women at the top and operate that way. A trickle down economy where then that got it decides what the rest of it gets is the best way to operate because we're too dumb to manage these things ourselves. But as I mentioned, that's upside down as far as I'm concerned. That's not the way this country is supposed to work. And we need to dig in and fight back against this because it's happening. The erosion is underway, and we're seeing it here in the state of Iowa all too well, to me, Laura.
Yeah, and remember, I know you've talked about this on past shows, but this school voucher bill that the
Yeah.
legislature basically rubber stamped, the governor's proposal, that after 2 years is not going to have any income limits at all. So you could have 2 fancy houses, 4 cars, and a boat, and make $1 million a year, and the state will still give you thousands of dollars every year to send your kid to a private school that you could easily afford. And meanwhile, the Iowa Senate and House Republicans just approved this bill that is going to lead to thousands of people being kicked off food assistance if they have that the asset test that they established is very low, $15,000 in total assets. And that includes a house and a car, and in some cases, a second car, but any savings account, any college savings account, any kids' savings, all kinds of other as savings bonds that were given to a baby after they were born. I mean, all of that could count toward the household's asset test and get people who are really the working poor or the disabled, the elderly, lots of children, they're going to lose food benefits. And the food assistance is not generous. I mean, the average family on food assistance is not getting anything like what this school voucher bill is going to be giving Iowans to send their kids to private school.
All right, and I can't believe it. I looked at the clock. We're just about out of time, and this happens when I talk to Laura because I mean this is a kindred spirit for me, folks. And you know, a lot of people have opinions, myself included, but she knows what she's talking about. So I love to have this muckraking stuff on Podcast by George. I want to give you a last word here, Laura. We're just about out of time. Give us a closer for this one.
Oh, thank you. I mean, I just really appreciate that people are willing to go into the weeds on some of the stuff that I cover. Like I said, it is a little bit obscure. It's the sausage making process, but it is important and it affects a lot of people's lives. So thank you for shining a light on it.
I will be back with you here again very shortly and shine some more light. Folks, that's Laura Belin of Bleeding Heartland. Thanks so much again, Laura, for coming on the show.
Thank you.
All right, let's go ahead and close out here. I want to bring this up full screen and give maybe the URL again for Bleeding Heartland. I had that on screen. I didn't say it very often for people that are listening in audio, but it's very simple. It's bleedingheartland.com. Go there and sign up. It'll direct you to some of the other locations. I support them on Patreon, but you can do it any number of ways and listen to a radio show on KHOI Community Radio. I think it's on Monday nights. It's on the web. You can check that out as well. And while you're at it, if you're on the web today, surfing around, whatever you're doing, go to podcastbygeorge.com. Sign up with us. You can pick a platform there. You can watch these video live streams by subscribing on YouTube, ringing the notification bell, give us a thumbs up there. You'll see the little icon on Podcast by George for YouTube. Also for Facebook, same type of thing. Leave us a comment, give us a thumbs up, a like there. And then all of the audio platforms are there. And these hour-long shows in particular are great to listen to if you're in your car or riding your bike here as it warms up, that type of thing. But folks, that's going to do it. That's going to wrap it up. That's all there is. And there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.